study this morning, and Jim and I had swapped. I retired on the first Sunday of November, and Jim took my Sunday, and I arranged with him to take this Sunday today. He was planning to be somewhere, and you can see that he's, wherever that was, Jim's with us today, and that's a good thing. And so we're glad to be here. But I guess I did the preparation, and he has a week off anyway. So I think though that all of us know this passage pretty well. If we grew up in a church, we probably learned songs, children's songs about the incident of the fiery furnace and in Daniel chapter 3. This fits into our series on faith being greater than fear. And the lesson this week is entitled Fearing God Rather Than People. And as you know, the phrase to fear God is not to be terrified of God and hide from God like Adam and Eve, but to respect God and to hold God as the greatest authority in your life. So to love God with your whole heart and mind and soul, as Jesus said was the first of the great commandments, and then your neighbor as yourself, the second part. That traveled through the Bible all the way from Adam and Eve all the way to Revelation. And at various times we have stories like the one today of different individuals being cornered into having to decide what they would do or what they would say, and whether what they did and say would express their loyalty to God as the greatest authority in their life, or whether they would cave in or get out of it in some other way, but avoid having to make that fork in the road decision. This passage has some new things for me in it, and I hope it does for you, even though there's a lot of good reaffirmation of what we may know and have known for a long time about this story. The setting again is in the book of Daniel, chapter 3, and what's happened already is Daniel and three of his friends, his buddies, who are exiles from Jerusalem, who are of the nobility or the educated class, have been basically captured and taken as slaves or servants into Babylon, the capital of Mesopotamia. Babylon now is about 40 miles, I believe, down the river or so from, or close by at least, to Baghdad in Iraq. So we're in that area of the world. And this is a time in which Babylon, in that great river valley of Mesopotamia, where the Tigris and the Euphrates drain the whole really Eastern Arabian, right above Persian Gulf area from the mountains of southern Russia, Georgia, modern day Georgia up there, Armenia, Azerbaijan, all of those places drained south to the Persian Gulf. And so civilizations in the ancient world being very river-based for the reasons that are very practical of trade and water for crops, being proximate, close by, being able to sail and barge up and down the river to carry food and pottery and other industrial products that were made in the bigger cities, to be able to transport armies, also to be able to protect from attack. If you built your city and your city walls incorporating the river as part of the moat, you could have an additional barrier against being attacked at least from one or two directions. It's interesting that one of the ways Babylon was conquered historically was to dry up or reroute the river that it was built beside, and that prevented the river waters from being high enough to protect the city, and then the enemy armies came in. So we're talking about Babylon, and this is a time, a century, when Egypt has had its day. Egypt has had its couple thousand years of domination in the Nile River Valley, where their armies would come up into the Jerusalem area and really would range as far north as eastern Turkey today, and over into the Mesopotamian plain, the area of Babylon. Well, what's happened is the history has moved on, and the king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, is someone who has the wealth, and it's his time to shine. And so he's conquered really most of Egypt and most of that same area of Palestine. In fact, he's gone as far east as Persia, and what would follow Babylon would be the Persian kings, and that Persian empire would take over all of really northern Egypt and northern Africa, all the way up into Turkey, part of Turkey, all the way over through that continent. It would take over a part of Macedonia, northern Greece, and it would take over all the way to and past the Indus River, Indus, which is getting into, which is basically passing through Pakistan today and into India to some degree. So that when Alexander the Great later conquered Persia, he inherited that very wide worldwide kingdom. But we're really at the time where the center of world power is shifting from Egypt into the Mesopotamian Valley area through Babylon. So you have a time when the kings were very aggressive, were military leaders, and they had great generals. They would have different policies toward the peoples they conquered. And the policy of Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians was to assimilate the best of the people they conquered. So the craftsmen, the tradesmen, the aristocrats, the intellectuals, the people with administrative skills were taken as servants into the capital city of Babylon, and Daniel and his three friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, are in that group. And the first part of Daniel starts off with that, them coming to Babylon, and the initial challenge as to how much to assimilate. The Babylonians wanted their captive talent to become Babylonians in that sense. They wanted them to learn the language, of course, of Babylon, and the people they brought in were smart enough to do that, but they also wanted them to take on Babylonian names, which they did. In this case, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are the Babylonian names for the Hebrew boys, some of which were Michael and Hananiah and other names. Daniel's name, we call him Daniel because that's his Hebrew name, and his name means El at the end is always God. Daniel, the first part is the verb form, and it basically means that God is my judge. And so Daniel is named the very Hebrew God is my judge name from birth, and that tends to be his challenge throughout his life, as the name Jesus is the Greek form of Joshua, which means Yah. The personal name of God is Shua, is Savior, or God saves. And so all of these Hebrew names that we've got in here have an original meaning. They go to Babylon. What the Babylonians do is they rename these four men, and they renamed everybody else. And so Daniel becomes Belteshazzar. And that name in Babylonian means Beltis, which is one of their gods, is king, or the king serves Beltis, or serve the king. And so basically, Beltis is related to Baal in the Palestinian area. Beltis is the female counterpart to Baal, and was also known as Ishtar, Astaroth, Astarte in the Greek and Roman area, Venus and Aphrodite. And so this is another form of the greatest female god of really the pagan world, or the non-Jewish world at that time. Egypt had its counterparts as well. So one of the things to pick up from this passage in the book of Daniel that at least speaks to me is that one of the ways these Jewish believers, these 3 or 4 men were assimilated or attempted to be assimilated and turned from Jews into something else, into Babylonians, was to rename them with the gods of the local area. They were given new names. In other words, they could have been called Daniel or Michael or Hananiah or whatever in their families or among the Jews, but the official names among Babylons was something very different. And it was the name of the Babylonian gods. Every one of those names, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, includes the name of a different Babylonian god, which basically is the counterpart to the fact that their Hebrew names mention God in some way too, but it was the God of the Jews, either Yahweh or the basic generic name of God or the high God, El. So, and by the way, Elohim is the plural form of that. And in Genesis, when it says God made the heavens and the earth, it was Elohim. God and God's helpers basically made the world, created the world. So that word El, Daniel, is right in there in the tradition of naming God as your judge, or God is going to be my judge. So here are these 4 guys, and they're brought in the first chapters of Daniel, and they're basically educated. They're young men. They're maybe, who knows, 12, 13, 14 years old. And they're taken to school along with all the other captives. And it's a very expensive boarding school, if you could call it that. It's like Donald Trump's son is in a $45,000 a year school, elementary school, and just graduating from it, I think. But basically, he's or middle school, I don't know which, but the point being that they are fed at this school, and they're fed the foods, the best foods of the Babylonians. But these boys are old enough to have been taught that the law of God and Moses says that some foods are good for you and some foods aren't. Some foods are a matter of faithfulness to God, clean foods, so to speak, or some foods are foods that defile your body. And because God has told you not to eat them, it becomes a matter of, again, what am I going to do? So in the first chapters of Daniel, that challenge to them as individuals and as a group of friends happens. And the way it's handled is Daniel talks to the principal of the school, so to speak, and says, give us a 7-day trial. Let us eat only vegetables, in other words, clean foods, and not some of the meats. Mostly was what were considered unclean, because any kind of shellfish, any kind of pork, any kind of cloven hoofed, like horses, or anything basically that wasn't approved in the Bible would have been defiling them and making them unclean in the eyes of God. So the principal says, okay, and these guys do it, and he sees that they're better off not eating the Babylonian food than the Babylonian food eating students were. So they're allowed to remain loyal and to basically, though, be different and to continue to live as a different subgroup within the group of Babylonian servants taken from their native lands. Also, in the early chapters of Daniel, Daniel 1 and 2, we have the first dream of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of the Babylonians. And he dreams of the statue made of different metals or materials, and basically tells his wise men, his astrologers, mostly is what they were, to interpret the dream and to tell him what it was actually, and none of them can do it, and they protest. They said there's no human being or no prophet anywhere that could tell you what you dream. See, he's telling them not only what does my dream mean, but he's saying, I had an awful dream. I want you to tell me what it was and then tell me what it means. So this is quite a challenge to any wise fellow. You can't go to the psychiatrist today who does dream interpretation and say, tell me what I dreamed and then tell me what it means. They'll laugh you out of the office and charge you anyway, okay, for their time. And so this is what happens, and all the wise men and astrologers in Babylon who fail are about to be put to death. And Daniel intercedes and says, give me a chance. And so he prays to God, and he goes and he tells Nebuchadnezzar the dream, and he tells him the interpretation, and he's promoted along with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And so these four men now are officials, or they're people of responsibility in the government of Babylon. They are servants in the Babylonian province. It would be like moving to Washington, D.C. and being part of the extended cabinet or part of the government. And you have to move, you have to go there. You can't live in Gainesville and commute. So you move your family and everything there. So these four guys are there, and something happens in chapter 3. And I'll basically read that for you. And King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, 90 feet high and 9 feet wide. So in the really vernacular original language is 60 cubits by 6 cubits, but the proportion is the same. It's one width times 10 for the height. Now, if you want to know how high that is, our steeple in our church is about 130 or so feet high, I believe. And so if you put that statue on the front steps in front of our steeple, you've got 40 feet to go, and about 7 feet of those 40 feet are the 7-foot bronze cross on the top of the steeple. So you're looking at something that if you drove down Green Street would have been very visible, wouldn't it? It would have been something that, everybody turns their head and goes, wow. Well, what Nebuchadnezzar did is he said he put it outside of Babylon because he probably wanted a big assembly of people to go there. And so he summons the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials to come to the dedication of the image he had set up. Okay, so all those people come and they assemble for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before it. So you have a great crowd of people. You have a stadium full, so to speak, of officials. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, "This is what you are commanded to do, O peoples, nations, and men of every language." And so it's not just local boys, local Babylonians, but it's all these people from other lands like Daniel and his friends who are now officials. And that's important. Nebuchadnezzar is when we think about why did he do this, remember who he's doing it to. He's doing it to people who grew up and were born somewhere else and may have divided loyalties. So he says, as the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all other kinds of music play, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. So that's the surprise. It's interesting that these people who assembled there weren't warned what they were going to be told and commanded to do. They were kind of caught, if they'd known, hey, here's what we're getting you there to do, maybe they could have caught the virus or something, or had an excuse and had a note from the doctor or whatever. But that didn't happen here. One of the interesting things in this passage that's curious is that Daniel's never mentioned. So we don't know where Daniel was or what his situation was. We do know that the story goes on with the 3 young men that are his friends. And so therefore, as soon as they heard the music, all the people fell down and worshiped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. At this time, some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. Okay, astrologers being people who find their wisdom in the stars, as we know, and those are going to be local boys, local Babylonians and Medes and Persians. You know that the 3 wise men basically were magi, or people that studied the stars and came from the east, came from Persia probably, or the Babylonian area, following the star. That was Jesus' star, that was the star of the Jews that stopped over Judah. So this Zoroastrian religion that would come later in time, basically based upon the idea that the heavens were populated by angels and many stars. So these are guys like that, and they denounced the Jews. They said, King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. You have issued a decree that everyone who hears the music must fall down and worship the image of gold, and that whoever does not fall down and worship, basically they shall be executed. They will be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, O king. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up. So basically what they're saying here is deeper than just they didn't bow down and worship the gold image. These guys, and they named them, and remember the names are important. They're named after the Babylonian gods, but the accusation is broader than just that they didn't worship the golden idol, but they don't serve your gods, O king, or worship the image of gold you set up. So not only are they politically disloyal, but they are religiously disloyal to the gods they're named after, okay? Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king, and Nebuchadnezzar said to them, is it true that you do not serve my gods? Starts with that. Or worship the image of gold that I've set up. Now, when you hear the sound of the music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand. In other words, when you're in the blazing furnace, there is no God at all, who can rescue you from what I've done, I've decided was your fate and your judgment. It's interesting that the Nebuchadnezzar really gives them a chance here. He's got the witness of the accusation of the astrologers, but he basically says, if you're ready to clean up your reputation, here's all you got to do. It was very much what happened later when Christians in the early Christian church and the persecution of Domitian and the 80, 90, 100, 110 AD era, when Christians were brought before the different courts throughout the Roman Empire and given a test. Bow and worship and sacrifice to the statue of the emperor of Rome. If you do, you're fine. You can leave with all of your family and your wealth and your property and your health as well. If not, we confiscate everything you own. We throw your family into slavery. They're sold as slaves at best, and you're thrown into the executioner's ring. You're eaten by the lions. And so this really almost foreshadows what has happened at other times in history, and we know of this happening to believers in similar situation very clearly in Rome. And I think I've taught classes and seekers some years ago about that era for Christians. But this is the situation. They're given that chance: be loyal to the king and to the king's gods, or be executed. But here's the answer, and this is important, the words they use. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us from it, and he will rescue us from your hand, O king. But if he does not rescue us, as they implies, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. So they stand firm. They basically say, no, we disagree with you. Nebuchadnezzar said, what God will be able to rescue you from my hand, the fiery furnace? They said, the God we serve is able to save us, and he will rescue us from your hand, possibly. But if he does not, we want you to know that we're not going to cave in and serve you. We're really calling the question on this. We're calling you're not a bluff, but your threat. Then Nebuchadnezzar was furious with them. His attitude toward them changed. His attitude had been helpful, trying to help them escape the punishment, giving them a chance. But now his attitude becomes harsh, and he's furious. And he ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual and commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie the three men up and throw them into the blazing furnace. So these men, wearing their robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes, were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. The king's command was so urgent and the furnace so hot that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took up the three men, and these three men firmly tied, and they fell into the blazing furnace. The three men are in the furnace. Excuse me. Then King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, "Weren't there three men that we tied up and threw into the fire?" And they replied, "Certainly, O king." He said, "Look, I see four men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the fourth looks like a son of the gods." Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." And let me race too quickly past this, although it's exciting to go ahead and finish. Look at how Nebuchadnezzar is beginning to refer to the God of the three men. Okay, I see a fourth man in there, and he looks like a son of the gods. And then Nebuchadnezzar says, "You're servants of the Most High God, or the highest God, or the greatest God of all. Come out, come here, leave the furnace, walk out." So the three men came out of the fire, and all the other people witnessing this crowded around them. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair of their head singed, their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. They might as well have been at a picnic at Gardens on Green. You know, here they basically looked just like they went in. They went in, as it said earlier, with all of their clothes and turbans and robes and everything on them, but none of these things are damaged as well as them. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel," the fourth man in there that looks like a son of God, "and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any God except their own God. Therefore, I, Nebuchadnezzar, decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces and their houses be turned into piles of rubble, for no other God can save in this way." And then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. It's interesting, too, we talked about the chapters before this chapter 3 we just read. The chapter that follows, chapter 4, has a great tragedy happening to Nebuchadnezzar. He has set up this 90-foot, 9-foot wide statue of gold, commanded that all the people bow to it and worship it. It's probably a statue of him, of a king. It's a human figure, at least, and it's probably meant to represent him. And just like an idol or a statue of the emperor was meant to represent the emperor of Rome when Christians were commanded to bow before it and sacrifice to it centuries later. And so what happens, though, in chapter 4 is really striking, because what happens is that Nebuchadnezzar in this passage is issuing a decree and telling a story about himself years later. What happens is that he basically falls into what we would call today mental illness. He exhibits, as described here, the signs of really great hallucination, of the inability to really even take care of himself, to be aware of himself, his body, his situation, whether he's clothed or not, what he's eating or not. It describes him as being naked and eating grass in the fields like cows, like cattle. And he basically loses the kingship, but when he recovers his mind, 7 years later, I believe it is, he's reinstated. And so chapter 4 is the story of what happened as told by his eyes and giving praise to God. So what happens basically, if I could say this, is that after Nebuchadnezzar's arrogance of creating this statue and saying, I'm the greatest, in chapter 4, God allows Nebuchadnezzar to become the least, to become the crazy man, the wild man, the counterpart to the Gerasene demoniac that was inhabited by Legion. He said, what is your name to the demons? And the demon says, our name is Legion because there are many of us. And then Jesus cast the demons out, and the demons go into the pigs, and the man goes back into his village, praising God. He's sane. He's got his wits about him again. And so this is the situation when people were mentally ill to that degree, to be schizophrenic level of severe schizophrenia. They were basically outcasts like lepers. They lived on the edge of town. They lived in the wilds. Kind people, if they were kind, or family members would bring them food and try to take care of them and hope that one day they might recover. And if you've had a mentally ill person in your family tree, or friends who do, that that's about as good as it's going to get sometimes. You're going to find an equilibrium where that person is protected and fed and cared for, and you're going to go through the years doing that and hoping that that's done for them, hoping that perhaps one day they'll recover, and then realizing that maybe they won't. So chapter 4 is the great reversal, and it's not part of our lesson today, but I wanted to include it because what's going on with the chapter 3 in Daniel is not just looking at what Daniel does, okay, or what the three friends of Daniel do and standing up to Nebuchadnezzar and being loyal to God, and really dealing with their fear, having the faith that the God that we worship and they worship is able to rescue in any situation, rescue us, no matter how bad it looks. But that if he chooses not to rescue us in that incident, he's still someone worth being loyal to. That's the message, looking at the men and their acts. But the bigger picture, or another side of this, is the story of the great pride of Nebuchadnezzar. And maybe the sense in which Nebuchadnezzar comes within a hair's breadth of realizing that the God of the Jews is the true God, but he never goes far enough to really put away or to turn away from the gods of Babylon, does he? Reminds me of Paul before the Roman leaders that he was interviewed by, who told him when he told him the gospel of Jesus dying and rising from the dead and wanting all people to worship the true God. He said, well, that's interesting. Come back and tell us about that later. When Jesus preached to the Athenian philosophers, they said, I'm sorry, when Paul did, they said the same thing. That's interesting. Come back and tell us more about it. They get close enough to hear the gospel or know the truth, but they don't really stand away from their old usual ways of life or worship. They don't repent. They don't turn in a new direction. And so the story of Daniel is really the story not of just the individuals in it, but of the kingdoms around them and what's going on, the locking of horns. A few weeks ago, I talked about the story of Ahab and Jezebel and the great prophet who stood up against them on Mount Carmel. And that was a test like this. It was a test where life was not at stake for the prophet and the people, the Jews, almost so, but it was a matter of which God will the people worship. And in that case, God comes and sends fire down upon the sacrifice on the mountaintop. And then after that, Jezebel vows vengeance and our prophet flees for his life. In this case, the people of God, the three men, and then later Daniel in the lion's den, when a similar thing happens under the Persian king, not Nebuchadnezzar, probably Darius, the Mede, who's the king at that time. Basically, you're looking at the story of people actually standing up and not running away or hiding, but putting their faith in the hands of God and what happens in this case. I've got a few of the illustrations or art pieces that have been developed through the years from really the Middle Ages on. The three men and Daniel have been really put before the Jewish people for many centuries as examples, urging Jews to be loyal even to the point of death. And certainly the Jewish people during the reign of Antiochus, the successor to Alexander the Great, the Greeks in the 200s and 300s BC, and Jesus himself, and not being willing to deny the kingdom of God to Pilate, but saying, my kingdom is not of this world, but I am a king. You said I was. To the Christians before the emperor and the emperor's servants when they were told to worship or else, to Luther at the Court of Worms, where Luther was dragged into the court and tried and maybe could have been executed as a heretic, but his words were, God help me, I cannot recant the fact what he was claiming, that salvation was through faith, not works, and that the Church of Rome had strayed in its primary teaching. Through all the different times when different groups of Christians, Baptists, were executed for baptizing by immersion. Other people, other Christians had to stand up during the Holocaust. Bonhoeffer, the Lutheran minister who went to the gas chambers along with the Jews because he spoke out against Hitler and the extreme atrocities of Hitler. All through history, there's been many times when these men were held up as examples of having the faith to overcome fear by being loyal. I call upon you to remember Job. What were Job's words when he was challenged by his wife? He says, even though he slay me, God slays me or allows me to be killed by this illness, yet will I trust in him. We've got that kind of faith here in these three men and their story. Let me show you these art pieces and look at them with me, and let's enjoy them together. There's about 10 of them, if I can find them on the screen here. And let's see where those are. Kent Sunday School. Yeah, here we go. Let me see if I can get them up and pull that up. Share that. Okay, I'm going to go into Zoom and try to share my screen, and give me a moment. If I can get out of this again and get to Zoom again. Okay, I've got
host. You should be able to share, Kent.
Pardon me?
You should be able to share.
When I do the share screen icon, the green icon, it says host disabled, participant screen sharing.
Try again.
Okay. Okay, I've got it. I think I've got it. Let me get the right file up here. Okay, can you see that bas-relief from the walls of Babylon? Can anybody talk back to me? I can't see you anymore.
No, it's not coming up.
All right, let me exit out of here. That's too bad.
Yeah,
And let me come back to you guys. Pardon me? You want to try in? Let's not waste too much time on it, but. And let's go up to slideshow.
just click one.
Click one? Okay, let's try that. All right, how about now?
No,
Nope. Okay.
I wonder if you
no, it worked when David shared your screen.
Ah,
You have to go to share.
But then when you shared it again, everything went off.
okay. I'm getting it. It's not showing up. I think I'll just pass on it. Let me
Okay,
ask you
there-
that. Let me ask you guys this. I'll come back to my
Now.
Zoom.
Now it's shared.
Now try.
Okay.
That's David's share.
Is this your share, David?
Yeah,
You are viewing David Shoemate's screen, is what I see at the top here.
yeah.
Okay.
Hit share. Let's try one more time. Hit share.
Try one more time. I have a helper here.
Okay, now go down here. You exited out of it.
Exit out of what?
You already exited out of it.
Of this before?
A
Yes.
minute ago.
Yeah, I did. I think I'm doing the same thing over that didn't work. All right. We give up. Okay. All right. Well, let me ask you this. What do you see in this story that's helpful? Now, I know, and I would never ask our visitor from the Middle East and one of our families to name herself or speak to the situation where she lives, where there's a more authoritarian, perhaps political system than we have here in the United States. But maybe Gail and Baker have been in places, some of our missionaries, Tony, maybe there's others who can relate to this more personally as being in situations where you're asked to accommodate to the point where you struggle with how far should I go? What we see in this passage is I see these three men saying no to the food, where there was a clear directive to not eat that kind of food. There was a lighter, softer resolution or compromise that they could work out, where they could eat a different kind of food. It wasn't pushed, and they weren't pushed into a complete corner. But the statue, 90 feet tall, 9 feet wide, to bow down to, pushed them into that corner. And the people who resented them, the local boys and girls, criticized them before the king, got them in trouble, and it became a matter of a trial by fire, as they later called it. Are you really going to go to the point of death to be loyal to your God? And I don't know if anybody here has had that kind of experience. It would be probably more doubtful than certain in the place and the times we live. But how far do you go? How do you know how much to compromise or accommodate in our lives as Christians today in the United States? What do you think? And unmute yourself if you have a thought or you have something to share.
And I think I would like to believe that I could stand up to that kind of pressure. Some minor things in my life, but nothing where my life was on the line, and you know, I would hope that I'm strong enough to do that, but you know, for me, it's hard to know.
Yeah, you can't. I think it would be pretty, I don't know, pretty prideful or arrogant to just say, "Oh yeah, no problem, I'll do that." We could want to be that tough and strong, but
When you're
we
looking
don't
at the
know.
mouth of the lion, or
Yeah.
feel the heat from the furnace, your feet get a little twitchy, I guess.
Yeah, when you have to walk across the coals. The story of Corrie ten Boom is a good example.
Yes.
Something where, what were they being told to do? Turn in the Jews, okay? And so that's a behavior, if I can be so analytical for a moment. They weren't being asked to promise something, say something, or really, overtly, publicly do something like the story in chapter 3 here, but they were being told what not to do, which is don't protect Jews, but they chose to do that and thought it was a matter of faith and loyalty to God and Christ to do that. And of course, they paid with their lives eventually. And that's just one story out of the millions that are out there in time and history and happening today. I think in probably a few of the African countries where just going to church is risking your life. In Nigeria, parts of Nigeria, other parts of Africa. I know Baker knows people there where if you pay attention to anything to any of the international news, you'll just hear week after week there's incidents of people being kidnapped or killed or bombed or burned by aggressive non-Christian people who have their agenda of exterminating Christians. And so those folks today on a Sunday are risking their lives, and like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did in this story, and so many other places. Remember the Bulgarian couple who our class adopted, the people who grew up there, and how as a boy he would run from house to house church on Sunday morning or at a time when they were worshiping, telling them that the police were starting to visit the different church members' homes to seize Bibles. Hide your Bible was his message as a little boy running from church to church. And his father was thrown in jail for a number of years because he was a minister. He was a Baptist minister by the communist forces in Bulgaria. And a few of you went to Bulgaria with me and know that couple. So again, those things are around us, probably not directly in our lives, not in my life that I know of. And so I ask myself, where is that point of accommodation or compromise? Well, it's hard to say about any particular person or incident or what if kind of situation, I think, because the context is so important probably. But in this passage, there's a few hints. And one thing that I see is the contrast between what people say about you and what you do yourself and what you say with your mouth. And what you see in this story and in really the book of Daniel is you'll see believers, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, Daniel, who are pretty much captured and forced to compromise in many parts of their life. The clothes they wear, the place they live, the language they speak, the government they serve, the different, in many different ways, they lose their Jewishness. They lose their culture, which is a culture that has a faith tradition as of the Jewish faith. But in the two areas that we know of in the book of Daniel, at least, in terms of accommodation and taking on the lifestyle, if I could call it that, of the Babylonians that are their captives, political superiors, their captors. They hold out against the food. They held out against the worship of the Babylonian gods, and they basically held out against bowing down and ascribing ultimate authority to the king or to the statue of the king, and putting that statute over the commandment of God, thou shalt have no other gods ahead of me or higher than me, which is one of the 10 commandments. And it's really that one of the 10 commandments that Nebuchadnezzar almost partially confesses to when he says, the Most High God, the God of who we will not allow anyone to speak against, okay? Well, I'm not telling you people to abandon your many gods, and I'm not abandoning my many gods, but I'm not going to speak against or act against the Most High God who could save these people from a fiery furnace, which all of our gods, we would never, we wouldn't step into that fiery furnace and put our lives in the hands of any of our gods, would we guys? And they kind of go, no, don't ask us to do that, please. So what you got here then is you've got a dichotomy, or you have, I think, examples of what these believers did do and what they wouldn't do. And so I like the idea that they were called by the names of other people God. It's almost like if I was talking to my little boy or little girl, I would say, sticks and stones can break my bones, but words can never hurt me. What people call you, what they say about you when you're a believer, doesn't matter to God. What you say about God and what you do in your relationship with God is what matters to God. Do you see that difference here?
Yes.
Because what you see is that we're living in a non-Christian world and a nation which has a Christian heritage, but really has so much that's non-Christian about it. And what people call you, if they call you church ladies or fuddy-duddies, or if they mock you or they criticize you, okay, it doesn't matter to God that you do that, and it shouldn't matter to us. We should be willing to be given bad names, okay, or to be criticized or be misunderstood, and not go around hiding from that fact of life, which is that believers will always be, I think, singled out as someone to be criticized about something, and laughed at, and sometimes persecuted. If people are jealous enough, they're going to turn you over or basically lie about you, as they did later about Daniel. Daniel's act was that he prayed. He was not supposed to pray to the Most High God, but he was supposed to pray to the gods of the Persians and to put his faith in the Persian king, much like this story with the Babylonian king. So this is what I see in this passage, is that it's almost like these guys are, if you look at them, the way they dress, the way they speak, who they work for, they're really almost indistinguishable probably from Babylonians. But if you look at what they do and don't do, if you look at who they worship and don't worship, who they put first in their life, you can see the difference. And that may be the thing to ask ourselves. Can I pass? I've always been amazed at the fact that when I meet somebody, I would say more often than not, someone will say, "Are you a minister?" And I look at myself and I say, what about me made them think that or suspect that or ask that? And it's always been puzzling to me, especially as a younger man, that I look that way. Was it what I wore? Was it how I acted? Was it my haircut? Was it my accent? Who knows? I don't know. But people will look at you and they will make an assumption about you based on how you look, sound, and act. But what matters to God is what we do and don't do, and what we worship and don't worship in our lives. And God is the one who, as the name Daniel says, God is our judge in that matter. What else do you all see in here before we end the
Hey,
class today?
Kent,
Yes.
I think I can pull up your slides on my iPad. Would you like me to try now, or?
Go ahead and try, but we need to close the class. We're out of time. So.
Okay, hang on.
And if that happens, enjoy these as we go.
Okay.
All right, hang on. There's the first one.
They're 1 through 10, and they will go through an order.
You don't need that one. Okay.
If you go,
Okay. Can you see those?
I cannot.
No.
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 Okay.
Thanks, Ann.
All right. I
Yeah.
tried.
Thanks,
And-
Kent.
Yeah, let me close in a prayer and bless, ask God to
Wait,
bless our
Kent.
days.
Hey, Kent. I think
Yes.
somebody else is trying to make a comment.
Okay,
Oh,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think one of the lessons in this lesson that really stands out for me is that, I thought about their response to Nebuchadnezzar when he threw them into the furnace was that, our God is able, but even if he doesn't, we praise him and we worship him. And I think that, the times that we really pray and intercede in prayer, and when God answers our prayer, the way that we wanted him to answer it. We're really full of our praise messages, but we're a lot more low key when it's answered in a different way that was not what we want. And that was just I guess it was a reminder to me that, sometimes, we can't see how God works, but these three, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said, it doesn't matter. We're praising our God because he's able.
Yeah, and at the time we're in, probably one of the best applications of what you're saying, Kathy, is COVID, and whether we individually, personally catch it, and whether we, how far it takes us, whether we're in the hospital, whether someone we love is, and giving that situation really fully to God and trusting that God's ability to save that person or to save us is something we need to put our trust in. Let me close this in prayer. Thank you all. Father, thank you for the story of Daniel and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego and leaving it for us to learn from today. And thank you that you are there to give us the faith that's greater than our individual fears. And that at a time of fear, where we do fear for our health and for the health of the ones we love, and we do what we can to strike that balance between preventing infection versus staying in touch and doing the things in our lives we need to get out and do, that as we seek that balance for ourselves and that you would guide us, that you would help us, and that you would protect us. And if perchance we do become ill, Father, that we would put our lives and our welfare and our health and recovery in your hands. And we ask this in Jesus' name as we go to serve you in this day and this week to come. Amen.
Yeah.
Man.
Bye-bye,
Thank you.
everybody.
David, I'd like to add something it was a miss. Last night, Joanne talked to Evelyn, and she was taking a vase, I guess, out of the upper shelf, and the handle broke off and the vase broke and it cut her hand. She's cut 2 tendons in her right hand, so she can't move the fingers. She went to emergency last night and they put a cast on it until Monday. So she'll be having surgery on Monday to see if they can fix that hand.
Oh, no.
Oh, goodness.
Gracious.
Awful.
Good job, Kent. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Kent.
Thank you.
God bless you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. God bless. Merry
Thanks,
Merry
Christmas,
Christmas,
everybody.
everybody.
Merry Christmas.
Merry
Merry
Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Merry
Good night.
Merry Christmas.
Oh.
Christmas. Merry Christmas, everybody. Oh, who are we talking?